Good afternoon and welcome to the Winter 2023 Daynard Community Conversation. Twice a year, the Daynard Distinguished Visiting Fellows Program brings nationally recognized public interest leaders to campus. These public interest leaders serve as role models for students, demonstrating how legal skills can be used effectively and creatively to make the world a better place. The fellows each deliver an address that focuses on the strategic use of law to promote public interest goals, participate in a roundtable, visit classes, and meet individually with community members. We so deeply appreciate the generous support of Professor Richard Daynard, and Carol Daynard in making this series possible. It is my great pleasure to introduce our Winter 2023 Daynard Public Interest Visiting Fellow, Dereka Purnell. Dereka is a human rights lawyer, researcher, and author of Becoming Abolitionist, Police, Protests, and the Pursuit of Freedom. She works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and training in community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. As a Skadden Fellow, she helped to build the Justice Project at Advancement Project's National Office, which focused on consent decrees, police and prosecutor accountability, and jail closures. She also co-created the COVID-19 Policing Project at the Community Resource Hub for Safety Accountability. Dereka received her JD from the Harvard Law School. Wow. Her BA from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and was selected as a Public Policy and International Affairs Law Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley. Her writing has been published widely, and she has lectured, studied, and strategized around social movements across the United States and worldwide. We are thrilled that Andrea James, hi Andrea, fully virtual world now, a graduate of our law school, joins Dereka as her conversation partner for this event. Andrea is the founder and executive director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, founder of Families for Justice as Healing, author of Upper Bunkies Unite, and other thoughts on the politics of mass incarceration. A 2015 Soros Justice Fellow and recipient of the 2016 Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. As a former defense attorney and formerly incarcerated woman, Andrea shares her personal and professional experiences to raise awareness of the effect of incarceration of women on themselves, their children, and communities. It's my great pleasure to now turn our event over to Dereka and Andrea.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, okay, sorry, I don't know. I'm just watching you. Hi, Andrea, how are you doing?
Hey sis, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, how are you all doing? Hi, so where would you like to start? Where would you like to be? I don't know where to look. This, I'll do this, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do this. I'll like rotate. Is that okay?
You're really far away from me, Dereka, so whatever feels comfortable for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so when I was invited to come here, I guess last year now, I was at first really intimidated because I don't practice law in the way that I was taught to practice law when I was in school. And that's mostly because when I was in law school, I learned that law is a very, very, very important legal tool, but I needed a political home to help me think more critically, more curiously, more courageously about the world. And so I just feel very, very lucky that the students who are in law school today are having much more curious and much more courageous conversations that I had when I was in law school. Like, I did not go to law school an abolitionist. I certainly left one. And it reminded me of a story that one of my professors shared about the first group of women who were coming on to law schools decades ago. And one thing they said is that, feminists went to Yale, right? That's where, if you were a feminist, you were supposed to go to Yale. But women went to Harvard because Harvard was so terrible towards women, they left feminists, right? They were politicized around the patriarchy that they experienced, not only from their classmates, but also from their professors. And so I had not the same, so that I was definitely a feminist when I went to law school, at least I thought I was. But again, I was constantly pushed by people, who just thought differently about the world. And so I'm very happy to be in conversation with Andrea, and very grateful again for the invitation, to the Daynards for making this possible, to Lucy, to Abby, to Shannon, to Yashna, everyone who's been making my stay here so great. And I'll say two more quick things. One, are y'all afraid of the weather? Because when I was in law school, there was so much snow that the parking meters would disappear. I'm not kidding. Like, I have pictures of like the tops of parking meters peeking out of snow. The benches would disappear. And you will only know how to get to campus if someone had an earlier class than you, because you would follow their footsteps. That's like the first thing. So I'm hot in Boston in February. So if you're not a climate activist, today is the day to join the fight. And the second thing is, Andrea is one of my heroes. And I don't say that like lightly. When I think about people who are organizing to push our world to be a different place, I actually think of Andrea. And so I feel very honored to have your time, your attention, and to steal you for a little bit in conversation to share with the people who join us today. So thank you all for coming. And Andrea, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Andrea, how would you like to start? How would you like to begin?
Well, I first want to acknowledge my law school. When you graduate from law school and then go to prison, you don't expect to be back in your law school with open arms. Is Professor Lucy Williams in that space at all? I took a welfare rights course with her. I graduated, I was the class of 98, and it was so incredibly it was part of my politicization, but from an academic perspective, because I was receiving public benefits at the time, and to sit in law school and to have the experience of learning from Professor Williams, I remember crying. I remember I literally broke down and cried in her class, and nobody, people thought I was strange anyway, but nobody really understood what was going on with me in the back of the room as I was sobbing one day because she was talking about something that I was having a direct experience with at the time. I want to lift up my dean, David Hall, just, taught us contracts. And the very first day of our contracts class, he talked about a case of a person who was enslaved, and he wanted people to understand what contracts was really all about. And so when you talk about Northeastern Law School, Patty Guerin, Josh Doan, my dear friends, and who supported me unconditionally when I did go to prison. You're talking about people, Margaret Burnham, you're talking about people who are just amazing in their courage. And all those years ago when I was in law school, talking about some things that we'll touch upon today. So it's truly an honor to be back in the law school. I'm not sure if that classroom existed when I was there, but it's great to see the growth of the school and hopefully the growth of the students. And lastly, Dereka, I want to, you're my hero. We were in, where were we? We were in Chicago together the last time.
Yes.
I was listening to you, and you were in the hot seat that I'm in right now. And you had the most beautiful conversation at the conference we were I can't even remember what conference it was.
Socialism. It was Socialism by Haymarket. The conference.
Socialism
conference in Chicago.
That's right. And I just sat and really listened to you, and you are just so brave, and you share so much of your personal life, Dereka, to help people to really understand where we all need to move to get to the place of significant abolition in this country and meaningful change. So I want to say thank you to you.
Oh, of course. Thank you. I was just thinking, because was it last week that the House passed like the resolution condemning socialism? Yes, some of y'all heard about that? Yeah, wow. Big capitalist energy right there. That doesn't scare y'all? No, sometimes a little bit, maybe. Yeah, so that's just sort of where of all the things to condemn right now. Not racism, not white supremacy, not anti-Asian violence. It's like, you know what? Socialism. So yes, we were at the socialism conference, and it was my first time there. And if you're interested in learning about socialism, which you should if you haven't, I would highly encourage you all to either attend or watch live. It's a very important conversation. And interestingly, since when was this? The 2020 uprisings, I have been a little bit blown away by how much abolition and defund has entered the mainstream conversation around public safety. And what I found, especially online, is that there are a lot of people who were excited to put abolitionists in their Twitter bios, or put out abolitionist propaganda. And then when I would either meet these people, we would come together in conversation, I was learning that a lot of the people who were coming to abolitionist politics sort of came to it in isolation, right? So they figured it out, like, I'm an abolitionist, I don't think that prisons and police should exist. And that was the full breadth of their analysis, right? They didn't understand the relationship between abolition and feminism or socialism, right? Or climate change or disability justice. And so the reason why I wrote the book the way that I wrote the book is because I was meeting people who call themselves abolitionists and then completely committed to capitalism, right? And I was like, wow, well, if you understand police and prisons help to manage inequality, you have to understand capitalism as a primary source of inequality for all kinds of people. And what police essentially do is manage that, right? Through cages, through surveillance. And so I'm curious about what that moment, 2020, when, we have been debating and thinking about abolition for years. And there were people who were doing that quite literally before I was born. And so for everyone who's just like, I tried to talk to people about abolition in my family, and they say, what about the murderers? And that's the conversation ended for me. I don't know what to say. It's like, yeah, well, people have been asking and debating and experimenting around these ideas in some senses for centuries, and then more specifically around prisons and police, I would say since the late maybe 60s. And so I'm curious about what this moment has been and felt like for you, who's, you know, been doing this work, who's formerly incarcerated, who works and organizes with currently and formerly incarcerated women and girls.
Wow, you know, sheesh. I gotta,
So we're just starting easy.
yeah. So, you know, I'm on my, let me see, I've been driving for 5 days now on our cross-country Free Her campaign to raise awareness about the need to close women's prisons. We have this really intensive campaign going and starting in the 6 New England states, the lowest incarceration populations in the country in those states, really including Massachusetts, where we could lead in demonstrating what different looks like. And I'm currently in a little town called Williams, Arizona, headed to Los Angeles from here for the last leg of our trek. And you know, it's been really interesting. We've been talking to people, lots of formerly incarcerated people, a couple of people we ran into that were cleaning highways that were currently incarcerated. But we've also been mostly speaking to the general public, and without leading with abolition, just, you know, getting in a general conversation with them. And you know, we always have our gear on everywhere we go. We have our logos on, and our camper has ending incarceration of women and girls wrapped up around it, Free Her. And people are very curious as to, you know, what does this mean? You know, what are you talking about? And just like you said, when you mentioned about, we stopped at one of the RV service places to clean out the camper, and the guy who was helping us out said, "What do you guys do?" I said, we work to end incarceration of women and girls. And he said, "Yeah, everybody except the criminals." So, it gives you a sense of, you know, meeting people where they are. But it was a challenge for us, Dereka. I think 2020 really was a moment for us to push forward, to get raise more awareness, for people to be more interested in understanding what we were talking about. Prior to that, just the audacity to start organizing inside of the federal prison where we were in 2010, and to throw the gauntlet down when we founded Families for Justice's Healing, our local, we're headquartered in our national work, our international work, and our local work. We started that initially at Families for Justice's Healing was started in the hallway in Danbury Federal Women's Prison. And we said at that time, we were going to work to end the incarceration of women and girls. We had no idea how to do it. We were writing letters to everybody we could, including President Obama. And we didn't know how our voices were going to be heard as we were buried in prison. There were about 2,000 of us in the prison at the time. And so just the audacity to make a statement like that as incarcerated women, we were going to end specifically the incarceration of women and girls. That threw us into not just this kind of heaviness around what are you talking about, abolition? We don't need police in prisons. Are you crazy? No, we have to bring it back even more, because we had the audacity to just talk about women and girls.
Right.
And, like, you know, and remember the time, this was 2010 when we started inside the prison to raise our voices about this. And, you know, this was the same year Michelle Alexander's book came out.
New Jim Crow, yeah.
New Jim Crow. So many people, including so many incarcerated brothers and sisters, had written, but nobody, you know, she hit a nerve in the country. You know, she wrote this chronologically in a way that, you know, brought history into the present and really helped people to, you know, think about what we are doing in this country. And she wrote it in a way that a lot of white folks who weren't directly affected by this started to pay attention. And then, of course, our dear comrade Piper you know, Piper Kerman, I wasn't in prison with Piper. I didn't meet her in person till we met with President Obama at the White House. But, you know, Piper wrote Orange is the New Black at the same time. And Piper will be the first one to tell you, listen, I wrote a book, read my book. You know, I didn't make a Netflix series. So that book was a profound inroad for lots of the, again, folks in the country who were whiter, wealthier, college students, women in college, who really started to sit up after being introduced to Piper's story and to start to pay attention. And so, you know, that's where we started, and having to get, you know, guided by Angela Davis and Kathy Boudin, who are our mentors, and got, you know, Kathy passed away recently, and we're still mourning the loss of Kathy, but they gave us the courage. You know, Angela said, look, says, if you didn't think we needed a gender analysis when we were in the Black Panther Party, you know, you better believe that we did. And so, you know, you had the courage to have the nerve to say you were going to do this. So, you know, straighten up your back and keep moving forward unapologetically on the path to ending incarceration of women and girls. So by the time we got to 2020, you know, we were really moving this conversation. And that just really opened the door up more for us to be heard.
Yes, yes. Wow. Yeah. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about what your stated goal is, right? Which is to end incarceration for women and girls. And that, where do I even start? So when a couple years ago, I went to Australia because they have a conference there every couple of years called Sisters Inside. And it's ran by a prison abolitionist organization who wants to end incarceration by focusing on women and girls, especially Indigenous women and girls, because people who are Indigenous in Australia, like people who are Indigenous to other countries and other parts of the world, experience death, incarceration, premature, by all of this stuff at rates that are just through the roof. And the goal is not for them to experience incarceration like proportionately, right? It's like, well, there are other ways that people can live with dignity, with freedom, with safety, then we should aspire to those goals. And listening to some of what they've been up against, we've seen that throughout history. And so the response that usually surrounds the conversation around women and girls is, well, you know, women have children. Well, let's build a daycare inside the prison, right? And these are considered feminist responses to incarceration. It's like, how do we feminize the jail? How do we make sure, you know, all of these women who are here, and the people who promote these ideas, who promote these reforms, they are trying to be responsive to the people who are incarcerated. So they say, you know, it's so devastating that 85% of the women who are here experience intimate partner violence and sexual violence. Let's make sure they have counselors inside the jail. Let's make sure they get fully rehabilitated, right? So all of the focus then goes on making the jail a more feminist, a more woman-friendly, a more gender-responsive, child-friendly center, right? And so it just watching people who are abolitionists be painted as bad guys who hate children, who hate women, who hate survivors, because we say, well, no, if you recognize that a lot of trauma is informing the kinds of ways that women who go to prison often for protecting themselves. If you understand that, then the goal is to not give them a daycare inside of a jail. Maybe we should have free daycare for women who need to escape intimate partner relationships. But they can't do that because they don't have childcare, right? They want to go back to school. It's like, well, what am I going to do with my kid? And so in the book, I try to tell stories, at least one specific story about someone who I met while organizing St. Louis, Inez. And so Inez was married to someone who abused her regularly. They would fight physically. And she didn't want him to be prosecuted. She just wanted the abuse to stop. And she felt like she couldn't leave because he earned more money than her. So when we hear stuff like, you know, Latino women makes 56 cents to the dollar of every dollar a white man makes for the same kind of work, these are not like statistics that you just share on Equal Pay Day, right? These are, no, because you know, y'all share the memes. I see the memes that you share. Like, these statistics have consequences that are violent, right? Pay gaps are violent because then, like Inez, people are like, well, he pays for daycare. And if he goes to prison, he's gonna lose his job. If he gets a record, then he won't be able to get another job. So I might as well like physically fight with him and defend myself so that I can continue nursing school so my children can be in daycare, right? And that what pisses me off when I see these resolutions passed and say we hate socialism. Well, under socialism, maybe we'll have daycare opportunities for free, right? And so it like all of those things are completely connected. So Inez, finally leaves her husband. She starts receiving unemployment because she loses her job and trying to stay home and watch her children. So she starts receiving unemployment. Then she gets a job, and the job, I think she makes like $17 per month over what she needed to qualify for daycare assistance. So she continues to receive her unemployment checks. It doesn't report that she has a job now. And one day she gets pulled over and she gets arrested and she goes to jail, the workhouse in St. Louis, for like fraud. And so now her nursing license is at stake, her parental rights are at stake, all of this because of $17. And she didn't report a job, because if she would have reported it, she would have been back in the situation. And so while she's in the workhouse, she contemplates taking her life. She's fearful of her kids. Like, what is it that I'm gonna do? How am I going to survive? And so when she eventually makes bail and gets out, she starts organizing with Action St. Louis, which is a community-based organization in St. Louis that came in the wake of the Ferguson uprising. And when I met her to like do these abolitionist training to accompany our legal work, I remember Inez being like, well, I wasn't supposed to be at the workhouse. I'm like, not like a good criminal, but like jails and prisons should be reserved for people who do horrible things, right? And I was just trying to take care of my kids. And so I want to burn down this jail because of what it did to me. I don't know if I'm ready to get rid of all jails and all prisons just yet. And I'm curious for the work that you do, especially with women who are currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, how do you navigate like the people who are like, well, I'm on board for like these groups of people, but I'm not definitely on board for abolition for all of the violent people who exist in the world?
Well, we have to meet people where they are, first of all. We went through all of the phases. We've been at this, including the time that we were in prison in the 2 years that we were organizing. And I was a lawyer. I went to prison for wire fraud. I served a 2-year sentence. My leadership circle, who we all fought and brought home, were in prison for 42 years, 23 years, 17 years, you name it, 16 years. So, these women, know firsthand what they're doing, what it's all about. And so, we meet people where they are. When we first started doing this work, as we came home and hit the ground, we wanted to just make everybody understand. We wanted everybody to just hear us and to just accept that, we were the experts and that we had been in a prison, and that, if you have ever been in a prison at 3 o'clock in the morning and heard the sobs, the sobs of a woman on a prison bunk next to you because she needs to see her children. If you've ever lived in a prison and seen women who are mopping a floor as their job and just fall to their knees inconsolable because they just can't breathe another moment because they need to hold their children. They need to see their children that some of them have not seen because of incarceration for 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And when you've had these experiences, when you're standing in a prison payphone line, where you're in your section of the prison where 200 women are crammed into a space, that should have only held maybe 20 people, and you're waiting for 4 payphones, and it's a long line, and you get to hear and understand all the stories of all the women in that prison and the harm, the further harm that their incarceration has caused their children because of that separation, and the children being forced into the child welfare system, the
Child punishment system,
child, thank you,
family regulation
the,
system, all the
the
names.
the child
Yes.
punishment system, all of the further harm that is caused, the economic harm, the further deepening of poverty that is caused because of yet another person from our community incarcerated, the disruption, the fiscal disruption, the economic disruption, the familial disruption, all of the families that are broken up. And I was in federal prison. So if you asked, women who had mothers who were incarcerated with them, generations in the thing, they were there. What do you hear? Drugs, drug case. My mother's here, my aunt's down the hill. Where's your husband? Where's your partner? Where's, your brother? Well, the men all are in a men's federal prison somewhere. Well, who was left to care for the children? And so when you start to understand these things, you come out swinging. You really do. You come out swinging. I mean, I was very fortunate. When I went to prison, my baby boy was 5 months old. I was still breastfeeding him. The system doesn't care about that. Children aren't a mitigating reason to not send a woman to prison. And society paints all incarcerated women as these bad mothers, as these horrible women, as these, they think that separating these women from their children is going to only make the children's lives better. And that is the furthest from the truth. And so we create these images in the heads of people, and we come out swinging when we come out of prison and want to start to organize, because we know how untrue it all is. And we know about, all the sisters who lost children when we were inside to gun violence.
Yeah.
Children were killed, children who were just, they died from other causes. The mothers weren't able to go and to bury their children. It's just horrific. The sexual violence that happens in prisons that we witness, that happens every single day. It's not an anomaly. Every now and then you hear something about, Dublin or Laurel or Logan or one of these other prisons around the country where these atrocities are happening, where the warden is literally running brothels outside of the back of the prison. And we know all of this because we do all this work, but people don't. They just think, oh, it's an anomaly, or the women. Right. Women wanted to make this, whatever it is. We had to learn, and it took us years to understand that we have to meet people where they are. And we have to also help them to understand what abolition actually means. And what we understand and know through all of our participatory research, because we all come from the communities that are most directly affected by prisons and policing, that prisons and policing don't create thriving, healthy people and communities. Thriving, healthy people create thriving, healthy communities. And so we had to pause, and we had to think about, how do we engage in conversations with people by meeting them where they are and finding those commonalities, whatever it is. Healthcare, maybe. Many older, more conservative people are very concerned about healthcare and the ability to pay for it and to receive good healthcare in this country, while helping them to understand about a lot of the legal work we do in our legal division, led by our senior counsel, Catherine Shevchenko. We sue prisons on behalf of the inadequate healthcare provided to women in prison. And so we find those commonalities because it's the only way. And we have to understand, what we're experiencing with the dial back of Roe and the Dobbs decision and all of these other things that are happening, the ultra-conservative movement that is happening on college campuses around the country and so forth. That's been a very long game. That's been decades long. And we have a long game also. And so we might be at a much earlier part of our long game, but we're not in a state of frustration or impatience any longer. We have developed our buckets of work. Yeah. We have developed our models of what different looks like. And we have developed our abolitionist pathway to achieve our goal of ending incarceration of women and girls. And so we're in this for the long haul, and we're very patient now. We're very, very patient now with the work that we're doing and the path that we've laid for ourselves. And so it's very challenging, Dereka, what you're asking about. And
Just because you said, we have to help people understand, I didn't give my definition of abolition because I was at Northeastern Law School, and I know y'all study that in all of your classes. When I say abolition, I'm talking about a political commitment to eliminating prisons, prosecution, surveillance, police as sites of violence, and also a commitment to eliminating the underlying reasons why people think they need police, why people rely on carceral institutions. So it's both. It's a commitment to doing both at the same time over time. I don't know if the person who I met with earlier is here, but one thing that I tried to say to her is that the other abolitionists who I organize with, who I write with, who I lawyer with, we understand that, in our lifetime, in my lifetime, I have 2 kids. I have an 8-year-old, and he's an Aquarius. Y'all help me. I have an 8-year-old who will be 9 in a couple of weeks, and I have a 6-year-old who's a Scorpio. So very dramatic household, very dramatic household. It may not happen in their lifetime, right? But what this generation is responsible for, what we're all alive right now, what we're responsible for is figuring out that in our lifetime, what is our political commitment to freezing and shrinking the carceral state and building the world that we want. Because if we don't figure out what that is in our lifetime with our work, then the people who are going to continue to fight for abolitionist presence and futures are going to be behind. So it's not your job to fire 1 million cops. It's not your job to close 18,000. I mean, if it is your job, please raise your hand and hire me. I would love to work for you. It's not our job to close 18,000 law enforcement agencies or 5,000 jails and prisons across the. It's not. We can't do all of that. It's not politically expedient. It won't work. Y'all see what they passing in the House. That won't work, right? So it's not your responsibility to figure out how to eliminate all of it right now. But it is our responsibility to do maybe say, well, there are 15,000 homicides every year. What can our generation do to get that number to 12,000? Or 10,000 or 5,000. If there are jails that are open in our community or cop cities being built in our forests, what is our responsibility to stop that from happening, right? What are the non-reformist reforms, the reforms that freeze resources from growing our carceral state? What are we committed to doing that right now, right? So that doesn't mean you need to become a detective and solve all of the murders or figure out how to stop all of the sexual violence. What it does mean is that joining other people and figuring out what is it that you can do and what we can do. Oh my gosh, it's like a little reunion, huh? What is it that we can do together? And that's why part of what I always invite students to do is to find a political home. Because a political home is going to ask you different questions than your job that you work for, that's probably funded by a foundation, right? If you go into public interest. Right? You're going to have a different set of political commitments because you're going to be working through different sets of political questions about the kind of world you want and the kind of human being that you want to be. And so when I first started organizing, I thought it was enough to be a good person. I was like, I'm good, right? I'm like a good person. I'm nice. I'm an Aries, so sometimes that comes out and gets to that. Okay, Aries, like, okay, because type A personality, very charismatic, all those things. And then you also think like, I'm smart. And if people tell you that you're smart your whole life, you probably believe them. You may pretend, but no. But people get to law school. Someone has told every one of you that like, you're smart. You probably can do this thing. But being smart and being nice, that's not enough to stop fascism. DeSantis doesn't care if you're nice and smart. He wants to walk through down the street. You think those people care? They don't care if you're nice and smart, right? So we have to be nice, we have to be smart, but we also have to be organized. And we have to have a political analysis. And that comes through struggle, that comes through being with community, that comes with not looking for an expert to give you answers about abolition, but really finding other people to debate and sharpen your politics, right? To ask more rigorous questions, to fail and to try again, to not be evangelistic about I had this one conversation with someone and they're not an abolitionist, and now see, it won't work. You know, that's not what we're charged to do. It may take 5
Can I
years.
add something to that,
Yes,
Derek?
please.
One of the things, you're raising a really important point about finding a political home, and I'll give you an example of why this is so important. Yes, there's there's the struggle to defund the police and to reallocate resources. One of the things that we've done at the National Council and at Families for Justice is Healing is we've also created the model of what different looks like. It's called reimagining communities. And I challenge all of the students at Northeastern, you're in my city, you're in my neighborhood, you're encroaching more and more.
They don't know because it's so warm that they forgot they were in Boston.
Right. But
telling them that they're in your city.
Yeah, but they're in Massachusetts. A year ago, we marched across the state to stop a new $50 million women's prison. This is a real-time example. And we need law schools like Northeastern to be more engaged. It's not enough to just teach students and be the social justice law school of the country. You need to direct the students to the actual campaigns. We have our first woman governor, Mara Healy, who's also an alum of Northeastern. We have Rachel Rollins, who was the district attorney, who we did incredible work with, Rachel, before she got tapped by Biden to go up to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and hoping to continue the relationship with Rachel as well, all Northeastern alum. And so we are challenging that our new governor now to care about the most vulnerable women among us. You're being celebrated as the first woman governor. Well, care about all of us. You ran on a ticket of caring about being a governor for all the people. Well, we're part of that people as well. And so we have a campaign going on in Massachusetts right now to literally close the first women's prison in the country, which is our state prison in Massachusetts, Framingham State Prison, which is an abysmal place. It's crumbling, it's old. There's all kinds of problems with it. And yet they hired a boutique firm to come up with a plan to make it a trauma-informed prison. Now that is not what we need. We need to
walk in circles. So when they get trauma at the prison, they just like go and walk around and then go to the informed part.
Right, exactly. And so what we need is if you know, and we're really pushing our new governor, Mara Healy, to hear us, to say, you know, whatever you choose to do, this is my point I'm trying to make. Whatever you choose to do, just like with police and funding police, if you choose to continue to fund police, if you choose to continue to fund prisons or thinking you can make prisons better, it's the culture of incarceration. So regardless of new buildings and whether you have flowers planted in the front lawn or whatever, or the walls painted pink and orange, whatever it is, the culture of incarceration is rotten to the core, and the harm is going to continue, and the separation of mothers from their children, but also the investment is going to go towards that prison and not into the communities most directly affected. So what we've said, as we've learned that we cannot continue to just be a battering ram against this massive granite, what we're asking is, if you're prepared to spend $50 million to build a new women's prison, I need you to put $50 million into reimagining communities. We eventually have no confidence that the state is going to stop putting people in cages, Black people, brown people, and poor people. That's who's in prisons, okay? Not the students sitting in that law school for the most part. That these
For the most part, I love the asterisk.
And so
some of you actually might be sitting in prison one day.
You might be, because
Yes.
here you go.
Yes,
So-
yes.
So, but my point is, we have to demand, because the participatory research that we've done over the past 12 years, Dereka, has given us a model that will literally, for lack of a better way of describing it, gut our sisters and their children out of a system that is relentless and will continue to find ways to recreate itself, and have done so since slavery. And so we have to make the demands. If you're going to fund police, you got to match that funding. with the people on the ground in St. Louis and LA, in Nashville, Don Harrington, Free Hots, the sisters at Families for Justice Healing, Sasha James, who happens to be my daughter, badass organizer. All of my children are part of this movement. Mallory Honora, who you're going to be in a roundtable. The law students will hear from later on this week. We have got to find ways to move this conversation just beyond what the system is not going to give up on soon enough for us. We have to get the conversation moved to, if this, then this. If you have $50 million to build a new women's prison, I need $50 million in reimagining communities, and we'll get our people out ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think I approach that a bit differently. I don't think that the matching will work, especially because what eventually happens is that when cities do both, cops, people who lobby around prisons, then disrupt the match part of it, right? And so
it's true, but I think we've studied that, and we're in study struggle constantly, and I think
of course.
Reimagining communities came out of the prisons. It came out of the communities that are most directly affected and are continuously churned in and out of these places. And I think that this model is something that will work. And you know, our mantra is, you know, think, experiment, lead.
Yeah,
and,
of course, yes.
But you know,
I just don't want students to go and advocate for $50 million for both without at least saying, well, if you join Andrea, then y'all can definitely figure that out. But part of what makes me nervous is that the thing that always gets, and I've been a part of campaigns that's done, and this is now a whole different conversation that we should keep talking about, because I do want to learn more about the campaign. But it's tricky, because it's same thing with like Rikers. All this stuff was supposed to happen in order to reduce incarcerations, but the thing that ultimately did get funded were 4 new jails.
4 new jails,
4 new gentrifying jails that's like mixed use with like apartments, shopping, a garden. It's always a garden. Like, let's, you know, make it a garden. And so we should keep talking about.
I mean, we wrote the prison jail construction moratorium bill. We got it through the House, through the Senate in Massachusetts, and former Governor Baker vetoed it. And the legislature couldn't, you know, come back and bring it across the line. And we're back at it again. That would only give us a 5-year pause to, you know, stop, just a 5-year pause to stop cramming a new prisons and jails, you know, and really giving us the opportunity. We passed primary caretakers in Massachusetts. We passed the, you know, the omnibus bill, all of these things that we have done in Massachusetts that really have laid the groundwork for us to create significant and meaningful change. And so we have all the tools, we have all the things in place. We just need them to stop investing in jails and prisons. And whether they do so or not, you need to, you know, invest at least as much in what we need to get, you know, the reimagining communities really stopping the flow of our people into these places, and using clemency, which is the last ask that we have of her. You have an opportunity, Mara Healy, with the stroke of a pen. We did this with President Obama. We got 50 women out, most of them serving life sentences in the federal system under President Obama. We know this works. Our director of clemency, Danny Metz, was serving 2 life sentences plus 50 years for drugs. And Danny is now our director of clemency, and we got Danny out because President Obama signed her clemency. We need Mara Healy to do the same thing. We have 7 women in Massachusetts who are sick, who are dying, who have dementia, sitting in Framingham. For what purpose? We need her to really come and sit and talk with us, which we have yet to be able to get a commitment from her to do that, as she continues to meet with DCAM, as she continues to meet with EOPS, to talk about this new or better women's incarceration cages. And so these are the things that we're working for and that we're pushing for. And we invite all of the Northeastern students to come in and to make us their political home. We're right in Roxbury in the historical Nubian Square, formerly Dudley Square. And so we invite you all to come in and really take part in this work to get this done and to decarcerate first, not figure out how do you build a new shinier jail or prison. How do you look at, which we have, We have done the work. We have the individual assessment plans for every single woman at Framingham. How do we decarcerate? How do we start with our elderly? How do we start with our sick? How do we bring them home? Stacy Borden, who's developed New Beginnings Reentry, spiraled in and out of Framingham for years and left one day because Angie Jefferson, who just came home, was serving life, told her, you're going to end up like me if you don't stop coming in here. And these women are now home and they are boots on the ground creating what different looks like. It's not rocket science. It really.
Well, Andrea, you're gonna have so many applications. What's the capacity for this room? What is it? 100. You're gonna have 100 applications, maybe more, because then they're gonna go and tell all of their classmates and friends to also apply. But I'm gonna I don't want us to run out of time, so I'm gonna open
I know we're short on time, Dereka, but one last plug I have to do and I'll shut up. We are building the Free Her think tank to do policy and research around ending incarceration of women and girls. It's called the Free Her Institute.com. Please go there. Our website is nationalcouncil.us. You can go to it through that. Please buy one of these t-shirts. Spread the word, send the link. It's freeherinstitute.com. We are building the Free Her think tank by the sale of 40,000 t-shirts because we were insistent upon not using nonprofit industrial complex dollars to build the think tank. It is an independent think tank that we're not tied to or have to worry about insulting or hurting the feelings of our funders at the National Council and at FJA. So please go on there, buy a t-shirt and ask a friend to do the same thing.
Wow, so you like policy, you like lawyering, you like organizing, you like communications, you like women and girls. This is amazing. Like, this is an amazing thing. And this is exactly why I want to be in conversation with you, because now y'all have like 7 assignments, y'all have organizations, it's all local. This is amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can we clap for Andrea? Hey, do you guys have any questions? Oh, wow, ready. I'm a little nervous. When people ready. No, can you say your name? What pronouns, year?
My name is Sam, pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a 1L, and all the 1Ls right now are currently taking crim. And
oh, my favorite class.
yeah, so I'm not sure about the other sections, but I know many folks in my own section feel extremely disempowered by the class. So do you have any advice for that?
Why do you feel disempowered by the class?
The professor buys into like the value of prison and incarceration and assigned us to read Angela Davis, and in class I had brought that up and was just immediately shot down. I just did not want to entertain any sort of conversation about abolition.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that the beautiful thing about law school is that your professors are professors and you're an adult and you can disagree with them and you can find empowerment in places outside of class. And so all of my professors, well, maybe literally except for like 4, I would say were like disempowering. But then I realized that, oh yeah, they're not the sole source of my information. Like there's so many different ways I can learn, be in conversation, think differently, and push back. And so, I think that their personal investment in prisons and police is, probably is due to their social conditioning and their education and all of the things that are important. And you have the right to disagree with them. I don't know if you need to give them that much power to then make you feel less powerful. You also could be like, damn, that's a shame. They're so wrong. You also know that they're responsible for like shaping the minds of so many people every day and probably have been for years. One of my professors, we didn't talk about slavery and contracts like at all. I didn't learn about, contracts, employment contracts coming out of the Freedoms Bureau. But I had to learn that outside of class, right? Because that's not something we covered. Or in property class, I had a professor, I'm not even kidding. He had a section in his textbook that was about, what's the court? Is it Pearson v. Post? And in describing like what's happening around the case, he has a section in his textbook that literally says, white people weren't the only ones who started the fights and talking about indigenous genocide. Like that was his contextualization. Like sometimes it was the indigenous people who started fights, right? So it's just like, yo, well, that's wrong. And I sent him the case for reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think had just come out, and I still haven't received an email back. So yeah, I mean, you can try to be in conversation. I had another law professor on the anniversary. So I'm from St. Louis. Ferguson uprising happened 5 minutes from my house. And on the anniversary of Michael Brown's murder, or on the anniversary of the non-indictment of Darren Wilson, I had a professor like invite the class to defend all of the reasons why Darren Wilson wasn't prosecuted, why the grand jury, whatever, and I remember that day being already so emotional. And even though I knew that a conviction wouldn't, save, us from police, but it was still a very emotional day. As someone who's like, oh, 1L or 2L, maybe I was a 2L. And it was just a very hard day. And I had people who were at home, I was on the phone, like we were crying. And it was just like, wow, I did not think I would have to go to class and then have to like defend the decision. And I just named that in class. And I just said, this is wrong and weird, to be frank, but this is really bad. This is wrong. And I explained reasons why. And we had a whole conversation about it afterwards. But yeah, like, it's okay for you to disagree with them. And you can always invite people to who think differently to be in conversation with them, to learn and to say, well, no, we disagree with him or her or that person. Yeah, but don't feel disempowered. Keep your power. Your power is so important. Don't give people power to take your power. I'm serious. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Taylor, I'm a 1L. I think I heard you mention a little bit about Cop City, what's happening. I'm from Atlanta.
Oh,
So I just wanted to know, to put into context, how does the abolitionist perspective fit in when it's happening in real time? Atlanta's also opening up a huge jail, concurrently. So how does that fit in when that's happening presently?
what do you mean, how does it fit in?
How does the abolition, what's the approach to that, I guess, and what is our role in that as it's happening?
Yeah, well, and Andrea, you should absolutely jump in too, but the way at least I think about and practice abolition is not as the way that I hear it sometimes for people who are new to abolitionists organizing the spaces, which is there's like a book about abolition and like a religious leader of abolition. Maybe it's Angela Davis, maybe it's Du Bois, but there's like an abolitionist way, right? And then you go to a book and then you flip to a page and it tells you how to approach something. And the way that I at least think about abolition is always in community with other people. Like when Dylan Rodriguez says there's no such thing as an individual abolitionist, what that means is that the way that you're thinking, arguing, debating, practicing, experimenting, building is in community with other people. And so the people who I know who are organizing against, do you all know Cop City? So in the city of Atlanta, a bunch of people on the police foundation board, a lot of corporations are funding how Hollywood has props and scenes and stages. They're kind of doing that as a training ground for police. So they're cutting through all this forest, all these trees, which help to eliminate violence for reasons I explained in the book, but they're raising this forest to build a place where cops can practice raids, right? And practice defeating protests. This is literally a training ground. That's what's happening. So people who call themselves forest defenders have gone to protect, the forest that's there and to use abolition as a way to critique the funding of it. So it's actually a very beautiful struggle that pulls in environmental justice, anti-racism, abolition. And people have been sleeping in, they've been doing art installations. There's been lots of resistance since the initiative was first announced. And so I think that that's amazing. We need to support more people who put their bodies on the line to say, no, this is wrong and we're not gonna let it happen. We also need lawyers finding creative ways to sue, to get injunctions, to do all of the rallying and support to stop or at least freeze the project as we figure out other strategic ways to do it. I think that there's an electoral strategy of getting people who either plan to be in office or who are in office to condemn and to critique it. So students at Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark Atlanta just issued statements saying, we don't want this. They're all HBCUs in Atlanta. We don't want this to happen, and we want to figure out how to stop it. And so I think building community support, legal strategy, electoral strategy, and an organizing strategy is how I find, the abolitionist perspective, but the way to attack a problem. And you don't even have to be fully like an abolitionist to be against tearing down the forest to build up like police summer camp training grounds. That's basically going to confront you the next time you have a protest where people are fighting for the right for bodily autonomy, right? So Andrew, when you mentioned earlier, the people who they're locking up are poor people, Black people, brown people. And that's true. In the last couple of years, there was all this celebration on the number of Black people going to jail declining. And what we realized when they looked at the numbers is that it was offset by the number of white people who are going to jail and prison, especially white women, right? So it's like, no, I don't want more proportional statistics. Like, I want less people in prisons and jails. Those are two different strategies, right? There's two different strategies, but do you want to jump in?
I think just to say I agree with everything that you're talking about. If I could jump back just a minute, it's all relevant to what the 1L and my hat goes out to all you 1Ls. But if I go back to the 1L who was talking about the law professor, it's another real reason to just step outside. And I know it's really, really tough. Law school makes you believe that there is nothing more important than what's happening in the classroom, particularly during your first year, and they make it very difficult for you to do anything outside of a classroom. But any opportunity you have, we actually address that issue. The law school teaches you in 1L about the 5 pillars of the criminal legal system, and that's inchoate crimes, we call them transgressions, personal, which is anything from an improper touching to murder. They have inchoate, personal, property, statutory, and I'm totally blanking on my 5th one now. And we did a participatory research project with women led by myself and Kathy Boudin. And so Kathy Boudin was in prison for a violent transgression, for murder. I was in prison for wire fraud. Everybody who participated in those 5 transgression groups had to have been prosecuted and incarcerated in order to qualify to do the participatory research project. And so we came out with 300 pages of recommendation that Andrea Ritchie helped us sift through so that we can also help to lead this conversation away from just what those pillars, those 5 pillars of responses that this system, not just criminal legal system, but the capitalist system, how you address money transgressions, all of those things. And you have 300 pages of other responses to the harm, to transgressions that people who actually caused that harm and who were prosecuted and incarcerated for causing that harm. And so when you know that that other information exists outside of it, you know that there are places to feel more empowered, or just knowing that that exists and that we're working with these tools. So when we talk about what does different look like, and you have a professor, I was taught by a prosecutor my crim law professor was a prosecutor, and I understand exactly how you feel sitting in that 1L class with whoever this professor is. But know that there is a lot of other information that is available to you that's being worked on as participatory research. And so find a political home and have access to all of that other information. And God bless you all you 1Ls.
Yes, in the back.
Sarah, I'm a 3L and I use she, her pronouns. I am very interested in our kind of parallel conversation between policy and like legal avenues for approaching abolition. And I have a question kind of pertaining to work that I'm doing at my internship where we're researching how to like reduce qualified immunity and take that away as an option for police who are creating violence. And what do you see as the avenues for using the legal system or the parts of the criminal justice system that are currently not working as a way to move towards abolition? Or does that still compete with the idea of we just really don't want people in prisons at all?
Well, again, all of the abolitionists who I lawyer and organize with, it's not a zero-sum game. No one's like, hey, if we give people healthcare in prisons, then, you know, we're not gonna get in the abolitionist future, so we should let people be sick and die. Like that's, if you look at the early critical resistance and insight materials from like the late 90s, I mean, these debates and experiments have been worked out in lots of different ways that gives us gratefully new problems to like argue about. But yeah, I haven't experienced any serious abolitionists say like, we're not gonna do anything to alleviate the suffering of what people have right now. And it's actually because we know the limitations in trying to alleviate the suffering with the current prison system that we have. That's just like, well, we need to just abolish it because it's actually, it's not going to work, you know. So do I think there are legal strategies that people can do towards abolitionist aims? 100%, absolutely. And this is again related to the political home stuff. And so when I was at Advancement Project, one of the things that I did was support this community organization, several community organizations, but one in particular in Ferguson, Missouri, who were essentially the community party to the consent decree, right? What the DOJ had with the Ferguson Police Department in order to reform them. And what I was like, oh, I don't want to reform the police. Like we need to like abolish the police. We need to figure out how to do all this stuff. But here's the community organizations I'm working with. The youngest person's like 27. The oldest person was like 72. Half of them were homeowners, half of them were tenants. And that makes a difference in relationship to your treatment by the police, right? That's a dynamic we have to talk about more because a lot of people were displaced by police in the aftermath of the Ferguson uprising. So to continue to be a tenant shows economic status and relationship status to who the police were primarily surveilling and targeting, you know, in Ferguson. And so after like hearing their concerns, I was like, oh, well, how about we do some political education together? How about we study together? Y'all bring resources, I'll bring resources. And then we can read and come up with what's our analysis about the police? Because your analysis is gonna then help inform the strategy. If your experiences, your personal experiences are the only thing that you have, or if you're a good person and you've been told that you're smart and you have good ideas, then you're probably gonna like use that, but that's not enough. So we work to spend time, you know, understanding and learning the history, purpose, function of police. We debated a lot, and then ultimately, you know, it wasn't like everyone became an abolitionist or everyone stayed reform, a carceral preservationist, I should say, to quote Miriam Kaba. But what it did was sharpen our agreements and our disagreements, and it gave us political clarity about the best way to use the consent decree. So in the consent decree, there were hundreds of provisions of how to reform the police. Some of those reforms were just terrible. They were really, really bad. There were a handful of reforms, though, that the community could use to reduce power from the police. So like modifying the municipal code that then show like the kinds of things that police are supposed to do. You know, modifying the use of force policies for the police department. Eliminating unconstitutional and even some constitutional stops that the Ferguson Police Department made of community members. And the people who were fighting against, when we decided to use those parts of the consent decree, right? Consent decree is the broad reformist response. But again, within this, we had a little bit of wiggle room. And the people who were resistant to the wiggle room to get community power were the police and the Department of Justice. They were both. So when I would go to court and I would say, hey, we should eliminate all these cases, the prosecutor and the DOJ would say, oh, no, you know, there was a victim in this case and they deserve justice. And I would say, well, this is a trespass case and it would be a fine. Like, what do you mean the victim? Who's the victim? And I kid you not, one of the victims was McDonald's. There's record, McDonald's. And I was like, so wait, you're going to keep this warrant open for someone in the community because they trespass at McDonald's because the victim deserves justice. So this person could get pulled over anytime and then just get like a fine. You know, so using the spaces in between or using litigation to help around prison conditions, all these things, I think when they're connected to broader organizing campaigns can be really, really helpful at, again, freezing and shrinking the carceral state. And so that's why I think lawyers should always be in community and struggle with people who are trying to do a much broader project and then figuring out the ways the law can support it. That was a great question. Andrea, do you want to jump in? I know you have a lot of experience with this.
Yes, and I also have to go.
Oh, okay. Oh.
I apologize, but I have a whole team sitting in a camper and we have a 5-hour drive ahead of us. And we have to get out of this town in Williams, Arizona. But I just, I really want to say, one, if you haven't, please, read Dereka's book. There's a lot of information that is available. Read Mariam Kaba's book, go to the wealth of resources that Andrea Ritchie and Mariam have compiled for us on interrupting criminalization. That's a site that you can go to really learn about methods of figuring out what does non-reformist reform look like? How do we advance these issues, even in spaces where we're not going to go to, abolition, straight abolition, you're in Boston, you're in my town, come, to FJA, come into Roxbury. Don't go to law school and not come into such an amazing space as what Sashi and Mallory lead at Families for Justice as Healing and all of the boots on the ground, People Not Prisons, our volunteer base. There's a massive campaign going on in Massachusetts right now. There's so much information that you can get. Please go to Free Her, they're gonna kill me, freeherinstitute.com and buy a t-shirt and pass the link on where we need to get rid of 40,000 t-shirts. So, there's lots and lots of information, but first of all, I'm deeply humbled for my law school to have even allowed me to come back. And thank you. And I hope it won't be the last time. But there's so much more that we can talk about, but I'm an organizer first, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an organizer. And I've got a team waiting in a camper for the last leg of a cross-country trip. And that has to take precedent. And so I don't want to keep them in there waiting much longer. And we have our Free Her dog, and they're Max with them.
Oh gosh, no, please go. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Dereka. Dereka, I love you. And please, you guys look for the panel coming up later in the week with Mallory and Sashi, who are going to talk more about the boots on the ground work we're doing right there in Boston and Massachusetts.
All right, I'll make sure I'll send that to Lucy and she can probably send it out to everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So bye, safe travels.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Is that it? Oh no, you guys have class.
The news, but that concludes our time for the community conversation today. But as Andrea shared, we do have a roundtable, Abolition in the Future We Build Together, where Dereka will be speaking with Sashi James, Mallory Honora, both from FJA, Carl Williams, Walter Johnson, and our own Daniel Medwed. So we really hope you can be there Wednesday, same time, same place. But really, thank you so much, Dereka, for sharing with us today. This has been an amazing opportunity. And as you can tell, we're hungry for more. So thank you.